Before we begin this video, I'd like to give a huge thank you to everyone who has contributed to the crowdfunding campaign for Firstborn. We've reached about 20% of our goal, and we couldn't have done it without your generosity. For those new to this channel, and for those who haven't watched a video on here in a while, I've spent the past month plugging a crowdfunding campaign intended to raise money for my good friend's short film, which I think is going to be fantastic. Viewers may have noticed that I haven't monetized any of the last 6 videos that I've published, since I figured that a few minutes of campaigning is more than enough advertising for one video. This will be the last video in which I mention this project, which is scheduled to end in less than a week. We really can use all the help we can get, and so if you'd like to help us make our project a reality, please consider donating $5 to our campaign, or purchasing one of the perks that we're selling to finance this film. If you'd like to help, please check out the links in the description. Thank you for considering, and enjoy the video. When someone tells a ghost story, there is usually an implication that the spectral subject or subjects of the tale constitute spirits of the dead, perhaps trapped in limbo between our world and the great beyond, perhaps unable to move on due to some unusually powerful ties to or unresolved business on Earth. Consciously or not, these spirits are said to attract our attention by presenting our senses with distinguishing features reminiscent of their pre-humus selves, visibly appearing to us as they did in life, speaking to us in their old earthly voices, or manifesting as aromas evocative of perfumes they once wore, or cigars they once smoked, before the final guttering of what the bard called their brief candle. It is more difficult to rationalize ghost stories in which the subject is a vehicle, crewed or occupied by several souls, such as a phantom ship, a ghostly automobile, or a spectral carriage. With the exception of Stephen King and a few overzealous auto mechanics, most of us Westerners scoff at the idea of a lifeless machine like a car or an airplane possessing a soul capable of living on after the final sputterings of its engine have consigned its metal frame to the scrapyard. Nevertheless, sightings of ghostly ships crewed by ghostly sailors, phantom carriages pulled by phantom horses, and other vehicular apparitions are staples of regional folklore. This disturbing reality begets uncomfortable questions. Is it possible that old ships really do have souls, as some schools of maritime superstition have long contended? Could the spirits of railwaymen who lost their lives in a train wreck, lest their tragic ends be forgotten, collectively project a visual portrait of their last moments on Earth onto our mortal plane? In this piece, we'll take a look at one of Canada's most interesting types of vehicular apparitions, the phenomenon of the ghost train. Readers of this author's work may already be familiar with the phantom train of Medicine Hat, Alberta, a strange story, first written down by columnist Ken Little of the Lethbridge Herald in the spring of 1966, and immortalized in Albertan Senator F.W. Gershaw's 1967 book, Samus, the Medicine Hat. Andrew Staceco began Little in his original article, who retired in 1955 after 48 years in Canadian Pacific train service, pulled his treasured engineer's watch from his shirt pocket, where he has carried it since vests went out of style. It was time for us to catch the phantom train. You can believe or disbelieve the story Mr. Staceco told, but he produced documented evidence that something mighty strange happened on 2 occasions amid cutbanks on the line between Medicine Hat and Dunmore in the summer of 1908. Little went on to explain how, in the early 1900s, an engineer named Bob Toohey and a stoker named Gus Day worked for the Canadian Pacific Railway out of the city of Medicine Hat, Alberta, in the southeastern corner of the province. One night in May 1908, these 2 associates were tasked with bringing a train from Medicine Hat to the easterly town of Dunmore, coupling with a passenger train called the Spokane Flyer, and continuing west beyond Lethbridge and into the Crow's Nest Pass. At a point about 2 miles outside of town at that time, where the Canadian Pacific Railway climbs out of the South Saskatchewan River Valley and onto the open prairie, the Canadian Pacific Railway wraps around a cutbank fronting a stream called Ross Creek. This cutbank obstructs the view of the tracks on both sides, preventing both eastbound and westbound trainmen from seeing what lies around the corner. On that fateful night, while they were making their way around the cut bank, Bob Toohey and Gus Day heard a sound that made their blood run cold. The warning whistle of an oncoming train, fast approaching from the east. Moments later, a train's headlights appeared around the cut bank, heralding an imminent head-on collision. Before Day had time to leap from the gangplank, or Toohey the opportunity to crank the brake lever, the approaching locomotive glided laterally off the tracks and sped past, floating on the air. Day stood at the cab doorway, and Toohey's hand remained suspended for the brake valve, Little wrote, as a string of phantom coaches sped past. The coach windows were lighted, and crew members waved a greeting from places where crew members would be expected to be found waving greetings as trains passed. And then the phantom disappeared. Toohey and Day, each fearful of what the other might have thought had they expressed feelings, said nothing. They continued to Dunmore, coupled to the Spokane Flyer, and finished the night without further incidents. 2 weeks after the strange event, Toohey and Day encountered each other on the streets of Medicine Hat. Both men had spent the interim consumed by thoughts of their bizarre experience, and found the courage to ask what the other had seen that night. To their relief, Toohey and Day found that their recollections of the event were identical. Toohey proceeded to explain that the apparition had spooked him so thoroughly that he had gone to see a fortune teller, who predicted that he would die within the month. In an effort to forestall his upcoming appointment with his maker, he decided to take a few days off work. Day, on the other hand, could not afford that luxury, and was compelled to remain on the job. A few nights after his conversation with Toohey, Day found himself working on the same engine, this time alongside an engineer named J. Nicholson. At exactly the same spot, Little wrote, the phantom train again appeared, headed toward them with whistle blowing and headlight burning. And again it simply evaporated into the darkness, as its crew members again waved greetings from their positions on its engine and cars. On the morning of June 8, 1908, Gus Day was assigned to yard service, and a stoker named Harry Thompson took his place in the engine room. Thompson's crew, led by engineer J. Nicholson, was to take their train from Medicine Hat to Dunmore, couple with the Spokane Flyer, and travel east to the town of Moose Jaw, Saskatchewan. They left Medicine Hat and headed into the hills, Little wrote. About 100 yards from the spot where the phantom train had been seen on 2 different nights and by 2 different crews, another train appeared around a curve, headed straight for them. This time it was daylight, and it was for real. It was number 514, the passenger train coming in from Lethbridge, and the man at the throttle was Bob Toohey, who had overcome his fears and returned to work. A front-page article in the next day's issue of the Medicine Hat News explained what happened next. The collision took place on the elevated piece of track just in front of the Pruitt Brickyard property. One of the workmen was just about to cross the track from the west side and was in such a position that he could see both trains, which each was blocked from view of the other by the high cut bank, around which the track makes an abrupt curve of this point. He waved frantically to Engineer Toohey, and the latter apparently realized the danger as he sprang back and reversed his engine. Just as he appeared at the cab door again, the 2 engines met, and a dense pall of steam and smoke settled over the wreck for some minutes. When it cleared away, the sight presented was one which will never be forgotten by those who witnessed it. Engine number 702, Spokane Flyer, was forced back off its front truck, and the whole front of the boiler head was torn off. The express car on the Crow train had been partially telescoped through the mail and baggage car and a tourist car. All 3 cars rolled into the ditch with the locomotive. Engineer Nicholson was quite dead when drawn from the wreck, as was Howard Gray, fireman of the Crow engine. Baggage man Archambault was instantly killed when his car telescoped. The 2 passengers which were also killed were Messrs. Jas Shaw and Duncan McEachran of Bow Island. 3 more men were seriously injured in the crash and were taken to the Medicine Hat Hospital in precarious condition. One of these was Bob Toohey, whose leg was broken and whose body had been battered. True to the fortune teller's predictions, the engineer soon succumbed to his injuries. In retrospect, Medicine Hat's phantom train, if Gus Day's story can be believed, appears to have been some sort of omen portending the crash of June 8th, a sort of locomotive doppelganger. This same sentiment appears in another prairie ghost story from the American state of Texas, which appeared in the October 1962 issue of the magazine Fate. The witness, Mr. Thomas Phillips, of Pasadena, Texas, claimed to have left the city of Belleville, Texas, on the evening of January 10, 1960, bound for the southerly city of Sealy. Phillips was on a multi-day business trip, and as it was too late for him to do any work in Sealy, he decided to take it easy and drive slowly. The Texas State Highway 36 was almost deserted at the time of night. At one point, while driving down a slight grade, Phillips spotted the lights of two oncoming cars far in the distance. As he gazed at the headlights, something in the ditch about 300 feet before him caught his attention. There seemed to be a cloud of fog moving slowly toward the road, he wrote. As I approached, I saw an old-style locomotive emerging from the very midst of the cloud and moving into the road in front of me. Being very close, I applied my brakes. As I watched the engine move across in front of me, I realized there was not a light of any kind on it, nor were there any crossing lights, signs, or signals. I became very angry, and from the bottom of my heart, condemned anyone who would be so stupid as to run a locomotive across a state highway without any warning. Then I noticed that even though my car had excellent lights, they were failing to light up the engine. I could see very clearly the road between the front of my car and the engine, but when they should have shone upon the engine, they just didn't. The engine seemed to be lighted from a source entirely apart from the lights of my car, but as it moved across the road, it came between me and the cars in the distance, and I could not see their lights anymore. The engine slowly passed and was followed by freight cars. As I sat there watching them go by, I could see the light from the horizon between them, but I still could not see the lights from the automobiles in the distance. As freight car after freight car passed, I kept waiting for the caboose, but it never came. The last was just another boxcar. Then suddenly, the lights of the automobiles reappeared in the distance, and my great surprise came when I realized that there was no sign of a railroad bed, not even a break in the pavement where one had ever been. Shaken and eager to share his unnerving experience, Phillips pulled into the nearest establishment, a late-night roadside restaurant. Inside, he struck up a conversation with the restaurant owner and told him about the phantom train. The businessman affirmed that there weren't any railroads in the area, let alone any that crossed the highway. When Phillips asked his opinion on the matter, the restaurant owner, clearly reluctant to discuss the subject, muttered, "It's a warning," without offering any further explanation. While the spectral subjects of the previous two stories were supposed to be premonitions of disaster, another ghost train spotted in December 1885 appeared in the wake of a tragedy, almost as if to lament the event, or as if to carry the soul of the boy who lost his life therein to a brighter place. This story appears in the 1966 book, Legends of Prince Edward Island, written by folklorist Frank Harold MacArthur. As the book's title would suggest, the tale is set on Prince Edward Island, or PEI, Canada's smallest province, located in the Gulf of St. Lawrence along the borders of Nova Scotia and New Brunswick. About 12 miles east of the PEI city of Summerside, on the unofficial border separating the more populous eastern half of the province from the more wild country, which islanders affectionately refer to as Up West, lies the quaint Acadian village of Wellington, situated at the head of the Grand River. It is in this rural community that our tale is set. Going back to December of 1885, MacArthur began, we find the island sleeping under a blanket of snow. The day of December 6th dawned bright, and the air was heavy with hoarfrost. At a place called the Mill House, a large frame dwelling, great preparations were going forward for a wedding supper that night. The bride-to-be was the miller's daughter, beautiful Janet Crosby. The groom, one of Charlottetown's gay young blades, by the name of Hilbert Coates. While the newlyweds' 60-something guests made their way toward the wedding reception, a group of local boys were trying out primitive pioneer ice skates called woodstocks on a pond within sight of the mill house. Vying for a prize put forward by the local blacksmith, who invented the skates, the boys partook in a speed skating competition across the pond. At the height of the contest, one of the skaters broke through thin ice and began to drown. The boy's elder brother, named John, dove after the flailing child, but was unable to rescue him from the frigid water. A local woman named Mrs. Davis, who had been walking by the pond at the time of the accident, managed to help John from the icy hole. Tragically, by the time John's brother was pulled from the water, he was already dead. The young boy's body was subsequently carried into the mill house, transforming the reception hall into a funeral home. Come midnight, Arthur wrote, a train was heard in the distance. All wondered at this, as the regular train had passed some hours before. Suddenly, the whistle shattered the stillness of that December night, followed by the ringing of the train's bell, as the iron horse rounded a curve in the railroad, not half a mile away. Wedding guests and mourners alike watched the mysterious locomotive fly over the railway bridge near the mill house and disappear around another bend. Some witnesses claimed to have seen the silhouette of a solitary passenger walking down the aisle of a coach car. Others reported seeing a lady sitting alone in one of the coaches, clutching a dog which barked as the train flashed past. All recalled the eerie light that poured from the train's headlamp. Among the wedding guests, MacArthur wrote, was a section man, James Ferguson, of Summerside. He and a couple of pals arrived by trolley car, as far as Wellington section, so on hearing the train, they rushed to the station to retrieve the trolley before the train struck it. Soon, the young fellows returned to say that they'd removed the trolley, stepped aside to let the train go by, but to their amazement, it just melted from view before their eyes. On enquiries at Summerside, it was learned that no train was dispatched that night. Not all phantom trains are messengers or harbingers of disaster. An excerpt of a letter written from a son to his father, which appeared in newspapers across Canada, the United States, and England throughout the summer of 1898, described one locomotive apparition, which the letter writer at least attributed to some mysterious but natural phenomenon. The anonymous author began his story at a desolate train station at a place called Shawnewan, now a community called Domain, Manitoba, located about 20 miles south of Winnipeg. While waiting for his train to arrive, the writer watched the weather quickly degenerate into a bone-chilling winter storm, complete with howling wind, swirling mist, and icy sheets of wind-blown snow. Shivering next to a telegraph pole, which he used as a windbreak, the writer was delighted when his ride suddenly emerged from the snowy haze. He enthusiastically grabbed his bag and waved his handkerchief in the air, only to watch the approaching train stop about 50 yards from the station. Not wishing to spend one more moment than necessary exposed to the harsh Manitoban elements, the man ran towards the locomotive when it mysteriously and suddenly disappeared. The writer stopped dead in his tracks, unable to reconcile his mind to what his senses had perceived. For several minutes, he stood beside the tracks in stunned amazement, when the train broke through the wintry gloom a second time. This time, the locomotive glided off the track and ran across the prairie, before melting back into the haze from which it had emerged. It gave me quite an eerie feeling, the Sun wrote, and I began to think that the cold had gotten into my head, and I cast superstitious glances around me to see if there were any more trains frolicking about in the snow. And suddenly I bethought me of what I had heard about the Mirage. The writer went on to hypothesize that both of his phantom train sightings were contemporaneous visions of the actual train, which arrived a few minutes later, projected by some curious action of the wind and the cold. Next week, we'll take a look at inexplicable phantom lights seen over railways across the Great White North, another of Canada's many railway mysteries. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please consider helping finance my friend Dan's short film, Firstborn. Our crowdfunding campaign will only be running for a few more days, and we could use all the help we can get. To see the perks that we're selling to finance this project, please check out the links in the description.